Record.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Pandooradom. I'm your host, Paul Cradle, and this is,
Miles Gray, your co-host, here on Pandooradom. Welcome, Pandoranauts.
yes, welcome, Pandoranauts. So, we just had a problem with a lost video download, but
Yes,
we'll just recreate that. That's fine. Uh,
travesty. It truly is,
yeah,
truly is disheartening. We
can you,
lost gold.
Miles, could you tell them where we left off and what we would like to talk about or recreate talking about or what happened?
Well, we were talking about a number of different competing issues, uh, but I think ultimately we sort of came onto a point where uh, I think we have sort of an issue that we've been trying to iron out, which has to do with how long-winded either one of us is during conversation, so that rather than co-hosting, we may err on the side, or not err on the side, but we end up going into kind of monological asides, extended periods, which I think under certain circumstances has its place, but it can also be very distracting from the points at hand on a show of this nature. I say from my own experience as a host of a general interest show on you know at least on public access, that there is a certain focus required, and I think it's not a problem that's only addressed to Paul. It's also addressed to yours truly. Even now, I'm waxing a bit long-winded. So
Not
that is
really.
essentially the issue. Back
Not,
to you, Paul.
oh, no, no, no. See, the thing is, I think that you were just going along. It's not necessarily about even timing. It's not like congressional hearings or whatever where they're like, I yield the remainder of my time and all of that. It's not necessarily timing. It's a bit more casual than that. Where you might have one party that is just able to speak more succinctly, yet get all of their points across and be equally valued to the point at where people don't even think that they're talking less because all their words carry so much more weight. Whereas someone a little more long-winded, they might not really be long-winded. It might just take them a little longer to get their ideas out. So a good listener is probably just going to um, give them the just give them the time that they need. I think I'll segue here into what we were saying about how I was
Well,
saying
let
that
me let
I'm,
me interrupt you, Paul.
yeah.
I, I hold on. I have to interrupt you. I don't disagree with you in terms of everyday conversation. What you say in terms of everyday discourse, I believe pretty much absolutely applies. However, the nature of a talk show, such as ours is, or a show about conversation, or a show that highlights discourse and interview and other forms of you know conversing, we have to be able to master the art of being a conversationalist, of being an interlocutor, because I think it's while some people may need more time than others, and which is certainly the case for me in trying to express myself historically. The thing is that we have to be beasts in the field, because this is what we are. We are beasts in the field at the moment, where we have to take the moment by the teeth and say, I have 2 or 3 minutes before I hand this piece of the conversation off to my co-host. Otherwise, the
Yeah.
entire topic will be derailed. Now, it doesn't mean that there's no place for spontaneity. I'll be the first to tell you otherwise. But I also think that a certain amount of structure of reining our own selves in, it has to do also with humility, is important. We need to
Uh-huh.
be able
Uh-huh.
to honor the other. That I honor you, you honor me, and most important, we honor the Pandora knots. And how do we do that?
That's true.
We do that by setting certain not boundaries, but certain limits that we say to ourselves, okay, I am going to shut off and hand the baton back over to my co-host right about now. Back to you, back to you,
Right.
Paul.
Right. I understand that, Miles. I understand what you're saying, and it's kind of a form of therapy for an introvert to have some kind of a structure
And
to
and
strive
on that note,
toward. Yes.
tell us what we lost
Right,
in the
right. What we
previous
lost.
conversation.
I think luckily I was able to remember this problem that I've had that's easy to forget later in life when nothing is reminding you that I've always been too quiet. And so it's hard to it's hard to ever find a place where you can begin to exercise something like equal time, conversational flow. It's very hard because I think one point is when I actually say I have been, when I do have the floor, for one thing, uh, someone like myself has an exceptionally hard time ever just organically holding the floor, as it were, in the course of just an arising kind of conversation that just so happens. We know that there's
So do you,
who's
so,
holding the floor.
so do you think this could have the effect of traumatizing you into talkativity?
It's yeah, but it's like I have very limited experience with holding the floor, and I have traumatizing experience about being interrupted and coming to expect to be interrupted in the normal course of conversation
On
to the
this
point
on this
where,
on this note, at the risk of
yeah.
traumatizing you more, just give me a moment. Yes,
Yeah.
Dan? What? This umbrella? Well, it's a Superman umbrella. I just found it on the street. I guess it's for the whole family. If we're gonna use it as a parasol, it's gonna be for boys, right? Well, it's for anybody. It doesn't matter who, if you're a boy or girl or what or anything else. Okay, whatever you are, it's suitable. And the thing is, do you remember how to say parasol? Shim, shim shia. Okay, אז בסדר, אוקיי? זאת לא מטריה, זאת שמשיה, בסדר? Okay, all right. So
Miles,
anyway, yeah. So go ahead, back to you, Paul. I
Miles,
do apologize. I just had to my daughter from elementary school.
that can be edited. So Miles, the thing
No,
is,
don't edit it. Don't edit it. That's
oh, the thing is, Miles, I have so little experience with holding the floor, or should I say, being able to hold the floor, where I'm just, especially in those cases where you actually have to have the hold the floor on your own doing, by your own charisma and your own stamina and your own conversational prowess of holding the floor. I have very limited experience with that, and I have even less experience with being given the floor without explosive interruption, without being walked on, with being expected to naturally be able to hand it over at an appropriate point in the flow. I don't know how to do that.
Well,
If
okay.
I'm not explosively interrupted or walked over, I think I have a tendency to believe that my point has fallen flat. I'm not interesting, and I'd better turn it to something. I better say something else because I'm losing them, and then turn it back to them, or say, or just to kind of make
Well,
my
so
own
then this is
conclusion. Make my own
so
conclusion
this
and
is
then turn it over. Back to you, Miles.
so this is yes, okay. Well, so this is a very insight abounding piece of information, knowing all of this. I mean, I think it's also worthwhile investigating how both of our careers abroad, or rather even our lifetimes spent as adults abroad, away from the United States and our other home countries where we may have them, have influenced us in this direction, or you in that direction, and my own. That we were both born in the United States of America, and yet we were never really what one might consider to be a stereotypical born American. Not to say that that really means a lot. I mean, it's a very easily challengeable idea in the first place. And yet, when I say it, even for those who might challenge the idea of a so called normative or normal American, there's still a part of you or of anybody that can say, okay, I know what he means, though. That yes, there is such thing I've noticed as a kind of normal American or a normal born American. So what I'm asking is, we, being of that nature, found ourselves adults abroad in East Asia. So we came from a society, namely the United States of America, which absolutely apotheosizes, uh, really, it simply, what is the word I'm looking for here? It treats as divine almost extroversion.
Exactly. Yes.
And we found ourselves abroad in East Asia, namely China, especially, but also, South Korea, Japan, and other in parts of Southeast Asia, where we lived and worked at various points, but probably for much of our adult lives. In any case, I think most of your adult life was spent in East Asia, and mine was spent partly in East Asia, but also in West Asia. So it's a mix for both of us, but ultimately not in the place we were born and ostensibly grew up as children. I mean, we grew up, our juvenile growing up was certainly in the United States, but our coming of age as adults was abroad. And so what I'm asking is, having been born of a culture that apotheosizes, that treats as nearly divine extroversion, but then finding ourselves as adults in Far East Asia, where what is apotheosized, what is treated as divine almost, is introverted subservience.
What's that? What's introverted subservience? Oh, you mean
Well, when living in China, in Japan, in South Korea, we as foreign teachers were not held to that uh, value. And yet, in general, as a whole, in East Asia, what is valued for the people is a kind of introverted subservience within a greater and technical hierarchy. What I like to call an
hmm,
honorific hierarchy. It's honorific is more a term that's used in linguistics, but I extend it to a kind of anthropological meaning. That Japan obviously, and also South Korea, are extremely honor-based societies, and China technically is too, but because of the Cultural Revolution and other factors, I would say that some of its honors, its system of its honor system has been simplified in a certain way, and it's been redirected and altered along Maoist lines and quasi post Maoist lines. But anyway, the point is that it's still essentially there. That if you are one of the people, which just by just statistically you probably will be, then your role is to not really speak up. Your role is to follow the rules, to be essentially, well, the idea is that you will be rewarded for introversion and being
Mm,
ostensibly modest and humble at all times, especially before your superiors, that you are expected to be even obsequious, that you are expected to be sort of brown nosing even at pretty much all times. It's not
mm.
so extreme as I'm painting it, of course. I'm being a little bit, I mean, it's much more complicated. I think it's a lot more nuanced than I'm painting it, but it gives a general sense. Obviously, not everybody in America is extroverted, but the idea is that American culture as a whole, Western culture as a whole, it has a tendency towards rewarding the extroverted. And then
Yeah.
to the opposite of that in East Asia, what is usually there is a tendency to reward introversion and subservience to the traditional hierarchy.
Well, Miles, I think that you're correct that they reward introversion more, and they hold it more as not just acceptable, as if it's something that, oh, we'll put up with, we'll not put it down so much. It's more honored. It's admired,
Yes, it's
actually.
honor.
They think that you must,
Said my
if you're introverted, you're you probably have something good to say. You probably have something people would like to
yeah.
hear. And it's interesting that you would say introverted subservience, because I differ with you there, where I don't think it's really subservience. I think it's a matter of turn taking or respect. And I don't think that there's even anything low. See, when you say something like introverted subservience, it sounds like in all cultures, the introverts are high up on the totem pole, and the introverts are subservient, lowly ones. But that's kind of flipping it over, where actually to reward and honor things, that means you actually elevate the introversion above a position of subservience to where they're actually
But see that
leaders.
I think, well,
See,
see, this
that's
is
you,
the thing
Miles.
that right. Well, the thing is that I actually think that there's nothing intrinsically subservient about introversion, especially in the West. However, in the East, I still believe that it's introversion because the level at which these societies organize themselves by extremely steep hierarchies is profound. And so when you have a person who is a technical inferior to a technical superior, there absolutely is subservience in the mix. And it's basically not, it's not it's not introversion that is characterized by subservience. It's basically introversion together with a subservient attitude. So it's two
Hmm.
separate things that are kind of happening at the same time. It doesn't mean that you are in your own soul subservient, but but you are practically subservient because you are lower on the totem pole of the hierarchy. That is to say, if you're working in a Japanese business in Tokyo, you absolutely have to defer to your boss at all times.
Yeah.
And you're not going to
Yes.
talk back. You're going to do what is asked of you. Now, while that's often true, that's often true in the United States as well, in many Western countries where you wouldn't dare challenge the boss. And yet, there is a certain way in which you can under certain circumstances. It depends on the country. Some places it's easier to challenge than in others. And the reason why this is so important and why it absolutely is a real phenomenon, I can bring to you an example of that I've always been fascinated by, which is what is it? Like air cabin crew interactions or balance of task balance, which is what is it called? It's cabin crew management. I can't think of the term off the top of my head at the moment, but it's essentially you're managing your cabin crew and how they interact. Now, if you have, this was a case, it was actually a slew of cases, but there was one in particular, which was sort of the nail on the coffin of changing things. That there was a flight, I believe it was Air Korea, and they essentially they entered into a serious problem with the aircraft, and it became quite a bit of a problem. And so because of the sort of subservient introversion that is held in such high esteem within South Korean culture and in East Asia in general, the co-pilot was afraid to challenge the senior pilot's judgments, even though they were in a life or death scenario. So
Yes.
he did actually begin to challenge lightly. So that was already breaking protocol in a way. He said, Captain, I do think that you may not realize, like even that is you don't say that in that
Yeah.
society. I
Yeah,
mean,
Miles.
it's depends. I mean, there are ways of doing it,
But
but my
Miles, do
point
you
is
know
that
how they
in the
fixed that
end,
problem though, Miles? Korean Air fixed that problem not by becoming more introverted, not by becoming more extroverted, but by switching to the English language. It was embedded
that
in their language.
hold on, but
There probably were other
that's not the
changes.
only that's not
There probably
well,
were
hold on,
other
that's not the
changes,
only
right? But because
that's
Korean is
not
an
the only
honorific language, that had a lot to do with it, as far as Malcolm Gladwell said.
that but I don't know whether we do you know if that flight that they were talking in Korean when that happened?
Yes, yes. And one of the first things that
Because
the new management that took over Korean Air said is that they can't speak in Korean because that's an honorific language and it prevents them from saying the urgent things to their higher ups. And another thing, Miles, well, did you have a point you'd like to make about that?
yeah, the thing is, I do agree with you about changes. That is to say that Korean is a highly honorific language, where English is at this point not. In this, hold on, Yarden, can you please hold this umbrella? Uh, hey, Gilly. Hello. 你好吗？非常好了。OK OK，好嘞，喂你。So yeah, well, basically, you're right. It is an honorific language, highly honorific, where you have multiple forms.
Right, but what I
It's
was
really
trying to
quite
say,
ornate.
the reason
But
I brought that up, Miles,
but
is
hold on, it's
because
not.
that doesn't necessarily mean it's an introverted language. It just means it's honorific. You see what I mean?
No, but that's not really. No, well, I see what you mean, but that's not what I'm arguing. It's not that the language is in any, because that's what I was trying to explain before. That it's not about the language or the system being subservient. It is practically subservient because what the honorific system does within the language is it keeps people within a certain caste, not a caste per
Yeah, yeah,
se, but
yeah.
it keeps people within a certain social stratum and
Right. But Miles, I have to
or
ask
slot
you,
within a,
but what's introverted about that, Miles? I don't see what's introverted about a hierarchical system because we have them in the West
No,
with
again,
extreme extroversion
but
as
no,
well.
but Paul, you misunderstand me. There's nothing about the system itself which is introverted.
Uh,
It's that it's that the system imposes upon uh, it's a system that imposes upon its the members of the society. It rewards introversion. It's not a system that is introverted in and of itself. I mean, a system. I don't know if a system can be introverted. I mean, this is a human.
but
This is
see,
like a human state.
Miles, I see in the West we have a system that rewards extroversion, and it's definitely not honorific by language, but it definitely is honorific in
Well, actually, I would challenge you there because actually English is quite honorific, but not in the way that Korean is. Korean is very
yeah,
traditionally honorific, but modern English actually is in linguistics is considered to be rather honorific.
you can't
Um,
you can show honor in,
and there's and there. Sorry, what?
yeah, you can show honor in English if you want. It's just not embedded in the
Well, let me explain why. As somebody who is, I'm kind of that's what I went to school for to a certain degree is linguistics, comparative linguistics, and what I found is that it's commonly believed that modern English, modern English is very well. Let's explain this very quickly. That it has a nature that causes it to be very circumlocutive or circumlocutive. That is to say that uh, rather than saying things as a single word, it's very common to to sort of beat around the bush and be less direct about what you are implying or what you were saying. Now, I would say that Americans are stereotypically you're done. Okay, just give me a moment, okay? So uh, that is to say that American English tends to be more direct than some other dialect or other regional variants of English. But in general, oh, this is very difficult to have a conversation like this. Yardanush, Yardanush, are you paying attention to me? I need you to help me right now, okay?
So you're saying that
Okay,
English has a
so
lot of circumlocution. You can say things indirectly, and so you find that kind
it
of
has a lot of. What I'm saying is that that is part and parcel of seeming polite in modern English. That
okay.
if I were, and this is far less common than you would think it is. And okay. Like, this is like impossible. So, uh, are you still there? I do
Yeah,
apologize for this.
yeah.
Boy.
I guess what
The
you're saying is that English can have
what
elements of honorificity.
sorry, what was that?
So English can have elements of honorificity if we so choose to use it that way. But the Koreans had no choice.
Well, it's not even just about so choosing to use it that way. This is what I'm trying to say, that I don't think that the average speaker of English even realizes just how honorific in a certain way English is. Now, taking for example uh, um, Japanese, South Korean. The reason I say that is, South Korean and North Korean are pretty close, but they've already diverged to a certain degree. But anyway, so we'll say South Korean, and also, other nearby, relatively nearby languages. You could include Malay Indonesian, uh, Filipino or Tagalog, and other forms that have, you know, either their honorific systems are still alive and well, or they may be very slightly moribund in the everyday spoken register, but they still essentially exist. But they're what you would call traditional honorific systems, where you have, you know, suffixes, separate verb forms, separate noun forms, which are specifically used depending on where you fall within the social strata. And it's rather strict that you might have one word for food that you would use for a peasant, another word that you would use for food for somebody who's sort of your social equal, you know, upper middle class or middle class. And then you have another word for food, which is strictly reserved for the royal family or the king. And that's a very, very obvious honorific system. It's like pretty clear. Okay, you have one word for a peasant or one of low social stature, one for sort of middling social stature, and then another for the king. That's a very obvious honorific system. But then English, modern English, it has none of that. I mean, you don't even have the so-called tu vu or system like in French, Italian, and other Romance languages, where you have one you, which is informal, and another you, which is formal. In English, you don't even really have that. We once did, but we no longer do. We had you and thou, but now we pretty much only have you, and it doesn't matter whether it's formal or informal. I believe that thou was once the informal,
so
and then
Miles,
you, but well, hold on, and then you was formal, and then the thou was lost, and now it seems like the opposite. So when you say thou, it sounds rather poetic,
Miles,
whereas in the past it was actually
do you think maybe
yeah.
the dropping of the honorific tenses in English might have contributed to the extrovert ideal that we have today in America? When you there's
Well,
no distinct there's no formal
we're
you.
getting into we're getting into Sapir-Whorf territory, which is, you know, it's basically theories that have to do with whether or not language influences thought,
Well, that's all we've
whether
been
it
talking
influences
about.
worldview, whether it influences perception.
We've been talking about that this whole time. Does the language influence thought? See, the thing is, or is it the other way around? Maybe a
Right.
people
Well, I just
who
finished
had
writing a research paper on this very thing. Is it that
maybe
way or
a
the other way
people,
around, or both? It's
maybe
probably
Miles,
both.
maybe a culture that has the extrovert ideal will just compound that and snowball it by dropping the formal tense of you or whatever you're talking about, those more strict formal honorific tenses in the language. They'll be dropped.
But
Then the culture itself will
but
then,
but
through its language will then also reinforce the extrovert ideal that it already had. So it's like a double
but
compounding.
the
See what I'm
yes, I do hear that. But I do. The only thing is that in English, that even though we may have lost some of our formal vocabulary, um, it's been rerouted in our case. This is not true of all languages necessarily, uh, but in English, it's through circumlocution, like I said, and what that essentially means. This is something that people who are English speakers don't even really they don't necessarily realize this until they have to start translating things. Let's say that you start, you're an American that only speaks English, and then you move to France and you have to learn French. Uh, you start to realize that there are so many things that you take for granted as an English speaker, but this is true of any language, where you have idioms that you know when to use them in the right context, but it somehow doesn't translate that you don't use those idioms in other languages. Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes languages actually share expressions because they have a common source or they were borrowed. But there are many times where you have an idiom or a what's called a collocation that works in one language, but it doesn't in another. So I can give an example. In English, you say to set the alarm. You know, the verb you use is to set the alarm. If I were to use any other verb, it would be weird or it wouldn't make sense or it would have a different meaning. If I said to do the alarm, you would say, maybe you would gather that's what I meant if I were not a native speaker of English. Or I could say to take the alarm, to press the alarm, to uh, any number of verbs you can think of. But to set the alarm is how you specifically say to
Yeah, I
set
never
the
thought
alarm.
about that. We have to
But
say
there,
set. There's no other verb.
but and if you use another verb, there's a high probability you're going to be misunderstood. And for example, in Hebrew, in at least in colloquial Hebrew, the way that you commonly will say to set the alarm translates to put the alarm.
Prepare,
And if you said
maybe.
that in English, it would mean like put on the what's that?
Prepare is probably the best alternative I can think of for set my alarm. Prepare my alarm for tomorrow. But it doesn't
You
have
could you could, but even that doesn't necessarily mean to actually manipulate the switches to then go off or have the bell go off at a certain time because it could be interpreted to mean that I prepared the alarm because we're moving and you packed it.
or
We
yeah,
don't know what
or
you mean necessarily by it's a
yeah.
high level. So in Hebrew, like I said, colloquially, you often say uh, it translates to put the alarm. If I were to say to put the alarm in English, it would seem like to put it on the shelf or
We have
physically
a
place it somewhere.
we have a minute left,
Uh,
Miles. Miles, do you think that
what
English, do you think we have a minute left? Do you think that the English language itself promotes extroversion or promotes a bias toward extroversion?
In some ways, yes, but But what I was trying to say before, though, is that through circumlocution, we say things that are actually very polite, that are considered completely extraneous in other languages. Where I say, "Excuse me, would there be any possibility that you would see
Oh,
fit to do
oh,
this?" I
I
mean, not
see.
people don't always say that
Like,
anymore,
what
but
might
it's
that
still
be?
it's still fairly common to introduce requests in that way. In other
Right.
languages, it's that kind of thing. Like, is there any possibility? Would it be possible? Stuff like that is often you don't even say that. You just say, "Please, uh, could you? I mean, please,
What might
bring me
that
that
be?
soda or something." It would be completely extraneous, or it would sound completely foreign to have this